afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Kent City Council workshop. Today is Tuesday, October 6, 2020. This is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 health and safety requirements and order of the governor. Welcome to anyone joining us on Kent TV 21, the Facebook City of Kent website, YouTube channel Kent TV 21, and anyone that is calling in this evening. So welcome, and welcome to all my council members that are here today. We have two items on the workshop agenda, and that would be the 21-22 biennial budget. So I would like to welcome Paula Painter.
Thank you, Council President Troutner, members of City Council, Mayor Ralph. I'm happy to be here tonight to continue our discussion about the 2021-2022 proposed budget. We'll get the screen, the PowerPoint up here in just one moment. And then we can get started. All right, so throughout this budget, or throughout this presentation, I am going to be spending a little bit of time answering some of the questions that you guys have had thus far. We were able to incorporate some of those questions into this presentation. Others we'll be talking about on Saturday. And in addition to the ones you guys have seen, the questions are still coming in, so that list will continue to grow. So I will try to refer back to the questions on the council log sheet as I work through these this presentation. Next slide, please. So again, we're going to talk about questions from the previous meeting. A lot of these are going to be incorporated throughout the presentation, so that way I'm not repeating myself multiple times as we get to different sections of the budget book. A lot of our focus is going to be on the other funds other than the general fund. We spent last time talking strictly about general fund. Next slide, please. But let's start off with a question that came up last week related to FTEs and how we got to be where we were at. So one of the, oops, hold on just one second. I've lost my notes here. So what I wanted to do is start with the 2019 adopted budget. And then from what I was understanding at the meeting last week, everyone was comfortable with that starting point of 720.59 FTEs. And I hope my assumption is good. What I'm going to do is walk forward from this point forward. If you guys do need clarification that goes back earlier than that, I'd be happy to continue to do that footwork for you. So we started off with the adopted budget with the 720.59 FTEs. And during 2019, Council approved on August 6, 2019, 10 positions. And those were made up of 4 term limited positions that would be working to support the Sound Transit project. 2 of those were in administration, 2 in ECD. Those projects are slated to go through the time frame of the Sound Transit project. In addition, there were 2 term limited positions related to the HCMA project. One of them was in HR and one of them was in finance. The other were 2 term limited correction officers position, and these were tied to the federal way jail agreement that we entered into through 2022. And so that's the timeline on those TLTs. In addition, there were 2 body worn camera support positions, one of which was a paralegal in law and a judicial specialist in court. And so then what you're going to see is, okay, so there's your total of 10, but you'll see a -1 in ECD, and you're saying, how did we end up with this, and where did the 5 from police come from? So what ended up happening is we had code enforcement in ECD, there were 3 FTEs that actually moved to the police department. So police received their 2 correction officers, plus they actually received employees from economic and community development related to code enforcement. And so that's why you're seeing a -1 for economic and community development and an increase of 5 for police. The 2020 budget requests that came in, there was the reduction of a total of 1.4 FTEs, which were impacted by budget adjustments and requests. And part of this was the reduction of 1 executive assistant from administration. HR did reduce a 0.6 analyst. Parks reduced a facilities maintenance worker 3. However, they did gain a parks ops maintenance worker 4. And police did have 3 officers that were part of the budget request process. So this is as they were going through, and as you can recall, there were some levels of reductions that were being done during that biennial budget process. And so it's that net effect of what you're seeing there. That led to a total adopted budget of 731.99 FTEs. During the 2020 mid-biennium budget adjustment, there was an adjustment to add 2 detectives, and you'll see that there in the police department, bringing us to an amended budget of 733.99. Next slide, please. So first column that you see there is a carryover from the previous slide. We're at 733.99 FTEs. During 2020, the council approved positions on January 21, so January 21st, and that was a term limited position for a permit tech in economic and community development. It was also a B&O supervisor in the finance department, and 2 term limited positions in the parks department that were connected to the King County Senior and Human Services levy. Also included in that column were reorgs, where there was a move from 6 members from IT who did move to administration. This was the multimedia team. There was a move from HR and 1 HR analyst that moved to administration. And then we had 2 GIS employees that moved from public works to IT. So that's some of the shifting that you're seeing there in the 2020 council/reorg. I didn't want to get too many numbers on one page, so I consolidated that, hoping everyone can follow that okay. And then finally with 2020, not that long ago, we went through that pretty extensive exercise to reduce the budget by $15.7 million. And in doing so, we did have reductions that impacted various departments, a total of 21.33. So as of the end of this year, 12/31/20, we are seeing a reduction of, or we're seeing balances of 716.66 FTEs. One of the things that's in there, which I probably should have moved maybe to the council reorg column, is finance did have an FTE during the COVID reductions. We technically reduced our FTE count by 2. However, at the end of this year, our term limited position that was using to help support during the HCMA project did go away, and that position is noted under the 2020 COVID reductions. In 2021, the request that you see, I know that when I presented this to you on Tuesday last week, I did show 5 FTEs in this column as for the request. However, one of the requests, the 2 FTEs in Public Works really would not begin until 2022. So I did shift that over. For 2021, administration is adding the one position that's in the general fund, and that's for the equity manager to be able to address our race and social justice concerns within the city and get that program going. In addition, information technology did reduce their professional services budget in order to fund 2 term limited positions. And as you can see, one of those positions is not intended to go past this year. It's actually, I believe, a 7-month position. So by 2022, that position will be reduced. The Public Works positions in 2022, the 2 positions that were added there, that was to replace what work is currently being done under contract and actually create positions within our city that are living wage positions within our Teamsters Union. At the end, we are showing a proposed FTE count for 2021 at 719.66 FTEs and at 2022 at 720.66 FTEs. And I'm hoping that that is addressing the questions that you guys had. Questions number 5, if you're looking at that spreadsheet, and number 16. One of the questions that is was also brought up is how do we count our interns? So when it comes to FTE counts, those are our regular employees. When it comes to interns or seasonal employees, they do not get rolled into our FTE count. They are not permanent employees of the city, so are not included in those counts. Do you guys have any questions?
So any questions for Paula on this portion here? All right, Paula, I'm not seeing any mics coming off or any questions or any hands raised, so I think we're good.
All right, so let's go ahead and go to our next slide, please. So general fund expenditures. So there are several different things that are going on within our general fund, a lot of moving pieces, and I know at times it makes it difficult to follow all of this information through. What we decided to do is break this out by where are our increases in from year to year and kind of our basic categories, and maybe some of those that are a little bit more volatile. One of the things that we want to be mindful of is when we're looking at the 2020 budget for supplies, and then we're looking at the 21 proposed budget. An important thing to keep in mind with this is when we went through the budget reduction exercise in 2020, we did have some one-time reductions where we reduced budgets for departments, both in the supplies and services arena, which was only intended to be through this year. A prime example of this is Parks was able to reduce a lot of their supplies by several $100,000, primarily because we haven't had the programs going on that we typically would. When we start to look at some of our increases, you're going to note that our liability insurance increase is over $300,000. That's 20%. And the primary reason for this is that we're the last negotiation with our contract, we did increase our deductible in order to keep our premiums down. And in the end, that is really a great call. However, when you do reduce your premiums, it does change the required fund balance that you need to have in reserves should you need to tap into them. So because of that higher requirement for reserve balances, we are building up some of that fund balance through this budget. So through the cost allocations for the liability insurance to get it more closely on target to where it would need to be. When it comes to the the IT allocation, there are a lot of factors that fit into that. You can see the increase from 2020 to 2021, and then another pretty significant increase in 2022. A lot of this, remember, has to do with the change in how our methodology for spreading out our charges for services related to programs that we're using, so we can more fairly spread the cost of those services or those subscription fees. So for example, if we're in finance, and which I am, one of the things that we're doing is we are in the midst of implementing Workday. Workday is going to begin in 2021. In 2022, part of our operating budget, which is what's going to be part of IT's allocation, is the cost of running that program, the subscription costs related to that program. Finance's share of that is about I don't have it in front of me. I want to say $265,000. And that cost, the reason why we want to charge finance for the work that they're doing is because then we more fairly distribute via our cost allocation how those dollars really should be spent and distributed. And that amount was 265, but it is a split between HR and finance. So that did hit both of our departments. We are splitting that at the 265. So then we do an analysis to determine what kind of work we're doing in the systems for various departments. So we're spreading those costs fairly and accurately instead of basing it on the work that IT does for other departments. So that's primarily the reason for the shift in that. In addition, in 2021, we do have Amanda coming on board, so there will be subscription costs related to that. Then there were some other increases in some of the maintenance costs. So not only did we have the IT allocation increase for how it hit the general fund, there was about $590,000 in increased subscription costs during this time. And in addition, if you can recall, during the mid-biennium budget adjustment, the new central allocation was implemented. So that is taking finance, HR, legal, and administration and allocating out their costs appropriately to the various funds. And by doing that, of course, all of those departments did charge an allocation to IT to be able to support the services that they need from us. So that created an increase in their cost allocation of $355,000, because as you get a cost allocation, clearly, if you're dependent on contributions within the city to be able to support yourself, you have to be able to spread those costs out to everybody. Whoops, sorry, just changed my page here. Didn't mean to. Okay, and so that's what's going on with the IT allocations. One of the things that will look funny to you is looking down at the last 4 rows. If you're including the totals row, there's a row called Other Services and Allocations. If you look at 2020, the other services is $24.4 million, where the allocations are 11.6. In 2021, those other services are 17.4 million dollars, where the allocation is $4.6 million. What you're going to find is if you net those two numbers, they're very close to one another. I mean, they're off by just a little bit. That's what you're seeing there truly is the reflection of annexation. When we had our annexation within the general fund in 2020, we had to account for those expenditures, but then of course those were allocated out as well, included in allocations as well. So that is what you're seeing overall. Although the numbers look big, they do net to be a reasonably close number. We're looking at a net of $12.76 million for 2020 and $12.78 million in 2021. In the 2021 budget, you're also going to see a reduction of transfers out. And what that is the 4% utility tax that was being receipted into the general fund and then transferred out to the capital resource fund will now be directly recorded into the capital resource fund. And then again, when you're looking at salaries and benefits, I should have talked about those first. We've talked a little bit about the assumptions. There's a lot that we don't know as we go into 2022. We did assume a 2.5% COLA in 2022, 5% medical. Also in 2022 is $37,000 for parks operations overtime and $60,000 for seasonal staffing within the parks department. So those do factor into what you're seeing in the 2022 proposed budget. And in addition to just looking at what kind of COLA we've applied to salaries and benefits, was there an increase to retirement and all of those sort of factors, another important thing to keep in mind is that staff is also paid on a scale. So as long people are getting here longer, they do move up the scale until they top out. There's a range in which people are paid. And so sometimes those increases from year to year factor in those pay step increases for the employees. Do you have any questions related to any of these general fund expenditures? Oh, I had one more thing before we do questions. Another thing that you're going to find that has increased the expenditures related to 2022 is related to the cost allocations. So in 2022, you're going to see that the cost allocation is lower than it is budgeted in 2021. That is because it is, for one, an estimate. It is actually going to be based off of actuals for 2020. And as you know, we did take budget reductions in the general fund for 2020. So it's anticipated we are not going to be able to allocate out those costs. And because there's a 2-year lag, sometimes it'll make the numbers and accounting seem a little funny, but this is the way that we can actually true up these expenses most cleanly, is to do it with the 2-year lag. So now I'll be happy to take any questions that people have.
Thank you, Paula. Councilmember Boyce, do you have your mic off?
Thank you, Madam President. A couple of questions. So, Paula, my first question. So let's start with the supplies. I'm just using this for example. Typical, I mean, when you make a deduction earlier with supplies, for example, that means I'm gonna pretty much live without it, right? I mean, typical is not one of the things you put back in later. Just kind of want to understand the rationale behind
Yes.
that, please.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So when we looked at our one-time reductions of supplies, really it boiled down to our parks department. In this case, they weren't doing the programs that they were doing. They weren't doing summer camps. They weren't doing all of their rec programs because they couldn't. With the stay home, stay safe, they were not able to engage in many things that typically require a lot of supplies to be able to put on. In fact, for parks, it was about $321,000 that they reduced from their supply budget just for 2020. We anticipate those programs coming back. And if we don't add back those dollars to them, then it would be, they would not be able to run the programs in 2021 like they would otherwise.
The bulk of that money is from the parks, the 22%.
Yeah, it is. 321,000 was from parks. Overall, one-time reductions was 468,000 based on all the departments.
Is IT the only department that charge other organization?
No, actually, in addition to IT, the other ones that charge obviously are HR, and it's not that they charge for HR services per se. Well, they do through a cost allocation, but those are our internal service funds. So things like our health insurance fund, our liability fund, our facilities fund, GIS, all of those are ones that are charging other departments for their services.
Is multimedia print shop, are they charging as well too?
Yes, they are. And I've kind of outlined the ones that are charging out just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. So fleet, IT, multimedia, insurance, facilities, GIS, property insurance, all of those are specific examples of
Okay.
allocations, charging out to departments.
Okay. I know at 3.7, I mean, it seemed a little high, but I get it, right? I mean, the allocation makes a big part of it. Then I understand with IT, right? So with workday and everything coming in, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm okay. All right, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Great questions. Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. So Paula, that last segment that you talked about, trying to even things out over the years, smoothing things out, I think you said. Do you recall that?
Yeah, that was speaking of the medical premiums. Is that correct?
Well, I thought it had to do with more with that, but I guess the question I had then, when you do that, it's kind of like, I don't want to say messing with the books, but do you have to explain that to the auditors when they come in? What you're doing?
No, we always have to explain to the auditors what we are doing. So when it comes to the cost allocation, we have to have rationale behind all of our cost allocations, and they must be sound and they must be prudent. And so those do get looked into by the auditors to ensure that we are doing what we need to be doing related to those.
All right, very good, thanks.
Yeah.
Councilmember Fincher.
My question was answered, thank you. The hand didn't lower in time. Thank you.
All right, any other questions about this slide?
And I'm hoping that's answering question number 1 on the list that you guys have there.
All right, thanks, Paula. You can move on.
All right. So what we're going to talk about next are our special revenue funds. And our special revenue funds are made up of the street operating fund, our Left One retirees, lodging tax, youth teen, capital resources, criminal justice, human and housing and community development, city arts program, and the showware operating fund. And I want to talk for just a moment about a topic that seems to be on the minds of a lot of you, and it really is related to that youth teen fund. And so one of the questions that were raised, that's going to be question number 6, and question number 17 relates to why is there a reduction in the youth teen fund? So I want to take a moment just to talk really about the Youth Teen Fund and what its intended purpose is. So Youth Teen Fund was created to ensure that we are setting aside dollars to be able to go towards our youth. However, it was really only designed to track one stream of dollars. It's not all encompassing related to our youth teen. And really, the Youth Teen Fund is just our repository to be able to put a portion of our utility taxes in. So this isn't something that we can choose arbitrarily based on our ordinance, what we want to put into this fund, but instead it is based on what are our collections going to be for our utility taxes. So our utility taxes, they actually contribute funding to a variety of different funds, from the general fund, the street fund, the youth teen fund, the capital resources fund. And those dollars are allocated by a specific percent. So clearly the ordinance says when you receive in $100 from the water utility tax, you're going to give that a portion of those dollars to the street or to the youth teen fund. So what's happened over time and why you're seeing this, the dollars that go, why you're seeing a reduction is each year we do true up our utility tax revenue based on really what is going coming in from year to year. And one of the things that has really been true is we've seen significant decreases in our telephone utility tax. So when you start to look at some of the reductions of the 21 budget being so low, the reduction in our utility tax definitely has caused a reduction in the budget. However, if the utility taxes do come in greater than we anticipated, we are required in accordance to our ordinance to put those dollars in. So it's not limited by the budget. However, we try to be realistic with how we do budget these funds. And so then what ends up happening is the revenue is collected and then it is then transferred into the general fund where it supports specific teen programs because our ordinance says we have to spend this percent of utility taxes on youth teen. We need to show the state auditors, look at, we collected it, we are accounting for it, and now we are giving it to support these specific youth programs. So there's other things that are going on within our park systems and really in other departments, but it is our commitment as a city, we've passed it through ordinance, that at minimum, we are going to make sure that this is what is designated for youth teen. So that's kind of what the youth teen fund is all about. In my mind, I kind of see it as a repository. It's a spot I throw money in just so when the auditors come in, they can say, look, they did account to ensure they're taking care of their youth and their teens like they said they would in their ordinance. And they've moved it only to projects that have proved, or only to the programs in the general fund that have proved that they've done that. So that's really what the youth teen program is about. And I know that there's been also some questions about, you know, what are we doing for our youth, for our seniors, for our disadvantaged populations. And on Saturday, Julie Perez-Condola, the Parks Director, will give us some more detailed information about that. So I'm hopeful at that point that will really help to answer some of your other questions.
Well, I've got a couple of hands raised right now, if you don't mind.
I would be happy to take questions.
All right, Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. So Paula, is council able to increase this amount into the youth teen fund, or is like the other 0.7% or the rest of these taxes already dedicated to something else?
So yes, the council can through changing the ordinance. Currently, the way the ordinance is written, all of the dollars for utility tax are designated for specific purposes, whether it be for, some of it is for general funds, some of it's for street funds, some of it's for capital. So it is the matter of, yes, but it would be changing the ordinance. And if we do change the ordinance, this will impact other programs that we have that are being supported by this revenue stream.
Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. Paula, I was looking at the lodging tax reduction here from 349 to 229. Can you tell me what's going on there?
Yeah, lodging tax revenue really has been declining greatly this year as we've navigated this whole COVID pandemic. We do have some reductions. They are based on some statistics, hotelier statistics that are out there as how we came up with those estimated dollars. As we learn more, if things change and actual hotel stays start going up, then we can look at doing some adjustments to those revenues. But right now, we're just trying to be cautious and kind of follow the information that's out there in the industry right now.
All right, thank you.
All right, I think that's it for hands raised at this point. So thank you, Paula.
You're welcome. And I'm hopeful that did answer questions 6 and 17. Don't know if I said that yet, other than what Director Paris Condola is going to speak about at Saturday's meeting.
All right, Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. Paula, I have a request. Can you read the questions for us when you say like this is answering question 16?
Oh, sure. Some of them are a little bit long. So, so questions that I was looking at right now. Question number 6 is, why is there a reduction in the Youth Teen Fund? And question 17 says, page 20, it looks like we haven't increased funding for Youth Teen Program since 2013. Have we increased program funding from other sources? And it is the talking about what we're really spending on programs, both in 2020 and looking at 21, 22 that we'll be talking about over on Saturday. That's a great suggestion. I will be sure to read the questions from now on. All right, so, oh, hold on just one moment before I switch slides. I think that's all I have. Let's go ahead and go to our next slide. So now I want to talk about some of the major changes in the special revenue fund. So in the street fund for 2022, we are going to see an increase in the general fund subsidy of $8,740. And in the transfer in from the general fund to support the landscape maintenance crew, the 2 FTEs that we talked about, there will be an additional $85,000 that will come in from the general fund. What I want to note is that these 2 items do not really, they are not going to increase the cost to the general fund. It's just that there'll be less money that will go to unallocated projects. So it's, instead of shifting it to projects where it'll sit, we're going to shift it into the operating fund to be able to manage this. In our capital resource fund, when it comes to the revenue, we've talked about this before, the 2% utility tax that was being recorded into the capital resources fund to pay debt service. Now that that debt is paid off, that internal debt is paid off, that money will shift back to the general fund. In addition, we are going to begin recording directly into the capital resource fund that 4% utility tax. But that's going to just offset this transfer in we would typically get. It does net zero, but instead of being a transfer in from the general fund, we're going to see it as a tax. And then finally, there is a transfer in from the general fund for the new B&O outdoor square footage tax of $1.8 million. Next page. Oops. There we go. So we just talked about street operating revenues. Now we're going to talk about the major expenditure changes to our special revenue funds, or to these 2 special revenue funds. So first, the street operating fund. So included in the 2021 budget is a National Bridges load study that'll be coming out of their B&O life cycle dollars, as well as bridge repair and maintenance, total of $250,000. The bridge repair and maintenance will continue on, and that's going to be an ongoing expense. So you'll see the $100,000 in 2022. The landscape maintenance crew, there are 2 FTEs that are going to come with that program. $285,000 is the cost of that. If we go back one slide, Michelle, to the revenue slide, what you're going to see, if you note that the transfer in So the revenue we need to be able to cover this is only $85,000. And that is because the contract cost of $200,000 will be reduced, is what we were using before. The $285,000 not only pays for the 2 positions, but it also pays for the required truck and trailer and equipment that they need in order to do that job. In addition, you will see an IT allocation adjustment as well as engineering allocation adjustment. Our criminal justice fund is slated to fund the car per officer program at $864,000 per year. And that will fund the remaining portion of the vehicles that are left to do for this program. In addition, you'll see body worn cameras for 2021 and 22 coming out of the criminal justice fund. That fund, the reason you're seeing a lower cost in 2021 is according to the quote that was been received. The first year you're purchasing the equipment. By year 2, you also have the technology data side that you have to store the data and other things related to that. So then you'll have some of those service and maintenance costs related to that. And then again, IT allocation adjustment for 2022.
Question, Madam President.
Go ahead, Councilmember
Hey,
Boyd.
Paula, the body worn camera is the red light fund. Where did that tie into that? I thought that was paying for some of
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. So I often look at things at that very high level
That's
of
okay.
criminal justice funds. I apologize. So within the criminal justice fund, we have several different components. So we do have the general criminal justice fund. We have the school zone cameras. We have the red light cameras. So in there, the body worn cameras will be paid for out of the red light camera fund, and the cars per officer, we are looking at the criminal justice fund and the school zone camera fund, looking to fund those depending on how revenues do come in.
How many cars do we left to get? Do you know roughly?
You know, that's one of the questions that's on our list.
Oh, okay.
I think these ones, there's 12 per year that we're looking at getting. And I do believe that this does finalize that, but I do know the chief is going to speak to this during his presentation on Saturday.
I can wait until Saturday. Thank you.
Yes. And so speaking of this, question number 11 says, are the Kent East Hill Operations Center remodel and the take-home vehicle program coming from general fund or the capital fund? So just taking a moment with question number 11 to talk about the take-home vehicles. Those are coming from the criminal justice fund. And since I'm on this question, we'll answer it later. The East Hill Operations Center will be coming out of the Capital Resources Fund. And so that will take care of question number 11. All right, are there any more questions before I move past this slide?
I think we're good, Paula.
All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the Capital Resources Fund. Oh, look, if I would have just waited 1 second, that would have answered the question right here. So the Capital Resources Fund, on this page here, I'm really just going to focus on the pot of money that comes from what we call general capital, because with much like the Criminal Justice Fund, there are multiple segments within the the Capital Resources Fund. So looking strictly at the general capital portion of this, and this is being funded by sales tax, the real estate excise tax first quarter %, and B&O tax. We have $200,000 for citywide training room remodel, the East Hill operations and feasibility study, the East Hill operations improvements, which is what we just spoke about just a moment ago, IT projects, and included in there would be funding of life cycle Jail improvements, parks capital projects, police fire range updates, and senior center re-roof. The totals you're seeing at the bottom of this page also come from the very first page that we went through as well. All right, next page, please. So Capital Resources Fund. Now I'm going to talk just a little bit more about this. Again, this has two segments, and here you're seeing kind of a blurred combined picture of this. So the sales and use tax coming in, we still have that coming in fairly decent. We were under budgeted in 2020, so this is why you're able to see some of those increases. You do see that 2% does go away and goes back to the general fund, and yet we're going to record the 4% directly in. The real estate excise tax, now that is a split between parks capital and general capital. So half of what you see is parks capital and half of what you see is general capital. I want to take a moment to actually speak about this for just a moment, because one of the questions that came up is what is question number 13, and it says, where is the $777,000 projected overage in the Capital Resources Fund being allocated in this budget? So ultimately, what the question is asking me is, why are you choosing to spend more money than you're actually getting in revenue? And so real estate excise tax is a big piece of this conversation. So I want to start by having a conversation about this. Historically, the city has purposefully under budgeted the real estate excise tax. And I'm going to say historically, but what I can say is we probably didn't do it historically enough. And what I mean by that is, if you recall, when we went through the Great Recession, the Capital Resources Fund really struggled as we navigated that. So what changed is the methodology behind how we do our budgeting for our real estate excise tax, and to actually budget to a level that we can be incredibly confident that we can receive that amount of money in. Over the years, if you look just at last year, overall, we received in $8 million in real estate excise tax instead of the probably $3.4 million that was budgeted. And we received in over $7 million the year before that. Again, when you don't know what's going to happen with the economy, you want to always play it safe. So when you begin to look at the Capital Resources Fund, the prudent thing to do is to allow those revenues to collect into your fund balance. Don't spend them all. And then when you go to the next year, you do have fund balance to tap into. And that's what's going on here. If you look at how the Capital Resources Fund is budgeted, for 2020, it is budgeted to have a $10.9 million fund balance. That is ample fund balance to be able to pay for the overage of $777,000. This approach really has benefited the city greatly in doing that. Also, you're going to see our streamlined sales tax sadly did go away after June of this year, so we will not be receiving any more in. Oh, one little tidbit I did want to speak to. When it comes to our collection for this year through August, so I haven't looked at September's total number, although what I saw a glimpse of it, it was a pretty decent number in September as well. Our real estate excise tax is at through August, almost $3.4 million. So we're already at what our budget is at this point in time. We have clearly some miscellaneous revenues, which are just that, miscellaneous in nature. You will find that we do have transfers in from the general fund for B&O tax. The proposed budget does include the $1.8 million transfer in from the general fund from the outdoor square footage. What you will find, you can see the transfer in that was $3.2 million is now down to $25,000 because that is our 4% sales tax that just dropped. Since we're recording it direct, or not sales tax, excuse me, utility tax, since we're recording it directly there. And then other sources and uses, this was a one-time entry, had to do with the shifting of revenue from one project to another. And we always send it back to its original source before we send it back out. So that's an anomaly. Next slide, please. Okay, and so what does our capital resource fund pay for? It pays for our debt service. You can see clearly we paid off some debt. Our debt is going down, which is great looking at 2021. We do have our internal allocations, our transfer to Showware Center, as well as capital projects. In addition to the general capital, so that the 3 items under general capital, that's what's being paid for out of the general capital. The parks capital, on the other hand, they too have capital projects for life cycle and for their capital program. Next slide, please. So we've moved past the special revenue funds and into the enterprise funds. And so so this is just a high glance at what you're going to see, what's going on in the various funds. When it comes to I'm kind of jumping ahead because I naturally just jump to the golf course because it is at the bottom of the page and that's where my eyes fell. But with the golf course, they did have in 2020 and 2021, they are budgeted to use PAR 3 proceeds. So one of the questions, and this is question number 14, which is asking me about the same question of the golf course, why are we going over $1.8 million? Well, in 2020, the sale of the PAR 3 proceeds came in as the second payment on that, and that was about $3.7 million. Some of those funds were actually spent in 2020 on capital projects. That's why you're seeing that budget in 2020 and 21 higher, because in 2021, there is an additional $1.7 million in projects that are budgeted for that fund. So that is why we received the revenue in 2020. We did not spend it all. It sits in fund balance, which means we have it in that fund balance to spend. And fund balance isn't revenue, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to see that offset, but the money is there. Next slide, please. So when we start looking at some of the major expenditure changes for the water fund, there is a utility vehicle and trailer that for $45,000, an off-road forklift, water service trucks, there's 2 of them. East Hill feasibility study, they are helping to contribute to some of that East Hill feasibility study. You remember part of that was coming from the Capital Resources Fund. There are little segments that do come from the utility funds. Again, you're going to see some allocation adjustments and then utility billing releases. So this is the IT support of our utility billing system. It's the professional services needed to be able to keep that system up and running. You're going to find very similar things in the sewer fund as well. The feasibility study, utility billing releases, the equipment trailer, a forklift, and the allocations. Next slide, please. I'm sorry I'm talking fast. I just realized the time and we probably have quite a few more slides to go, but please don't hesitate to interrupt. Our drainage utility fund, included in the drainage utility fund is a legal camp cleanup. That would be $200,000 each year. In addition, the off-road forklift. Just so you know too, that forklift, the costs are shared with the water fund. The other forklift that's mentioned there, those costs are shared with the sewer fund. So multiple funds are being able to benefit from these pieces of equipment. There's the equipment trailer, billing, utility billing releases, feasibility study, and again, cost allocations. Next slide, please. With solid waste utility, there is the IT allocation. Same with utility clearing and the golf complex. So with that utility clearing, that fund always has to equal zero at the end of the day. It really is a repository for all the costs to run the customer service unit as it supports our various utility funds. So those costs get recorded there and then allocated out. The golf complex does have an IT allocation adjustment, and then also wanted to bring to your attention the transfers to the golf projects of $1.7 million. Next slide, please. So these are our internal service funds. So when the question was asked about what other funds allocate out and charge people for services, these are the ones that are internal services that do recoup their costs. The way that they are funded is through recouping costs from other funds because they support other funds. Fleet services, I did have a question, so I want to chat about that now. It's question number 15, and it says, same question that we just actually talked about with the golf complex, is what's going on with the overage in this fund. So we are spending more out of this fund than we are collecting in revenue. At this point in time, the fleet fund has continued to have excess fund balance, and yet we still have need to have vehicles replaced. They're past their useful life. So what we have been doing for the past several years is continuing to buy some extra vehicles to be able to help spend down that fund balance and actually to replenish our fleet so that way our cars are getting more closely on that life cycle. It does ask the question too, is this funding the police vehicle purchase? So the answer to that is no, at least not when it's coming to the purchasing of the new vehicles. So the fleet fund, they are in the business of replacement. So once a vehicle is purchased, a department purchases the vehicle, it goes to fleet. Once fleet has the vehicle, it recoups money for that vehicle on a monthly basis to put into reserves to replace it at the end of its life cycle. So the dollars sitting in reserve in fleet, those are from vehicles they've collected dollars on that are ready to be replaced. We need to get those replaced. And so we let them overspend some of that budget. To spend into that fund balance. Excuse me, I didn't say that quite right. But when it comes to, and they also take care of the maintenance and the fuel of the vehicles. But when it comes to actually purchasing brand new vehicles that are going to be part of fleet, which means they're not replacing a vehicle that's already there, that is incumbent on the departments to do so. And next slide, please. Information technology. So these are the major revenue changes, and the only one that has some changes has to do with the information technology department with $130,000 for support for technology. In that realm. And now on to fleet. So some of the fleet changes, again, allocation adjustments, IT. So the other slide was the revenue side of the house. I'm sorry, that's that cost allocation. Michelle, can you go back to IT, back one page? Thank you. This is the revenue change. So what we're finding is technology does need to recoup the cost of their expenditure because again, that's how their fund works and stays whole. So if we go back, we'll look to see what this $130,000 is supporting. So if we go to the next slide, please. And you can see information technology. They did add 2 term limited positions. Again, they were willing to reduce their professional services by the amount they needed in order to cover the positions that they've requested, one of which is very short in term and will no longer be here in 2022. The technical support specialist, a contractor at $130,000 for each of the year, and allocation adjustments to go with that as well. Next slide, please. With facilities, again, we do have a cost allocation adjustment. And then finally, we have increases to our various insurance funds for, let's see, unemployment, workers' comp, liability, and property insurance. And this would be related to the increase in unemployment claims. As you know, we have had some increased unemployment due to some of the reductions that we have done. All right, and so can we go back one more slide, please? Thank you. So that I walked you, and actually that didn't take as long as I thought. So I walked you through the enterprise funds, the internal service funds, I will have to go back because there's a couple of questions that I forgot to speak to during this process. So I will go back and chat about some of those. But before I do that, let's go ahead and go to the next slide and cover, are there questions on this before we go to some of the other council questions?
Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. Paula, can you tell me what Central Stores Fund is, please?
Yeah, the Central Stores Fund actually is in the Finance Department. And ultimately what the Central Stores Fund is responsible for is purchasing of supplies and services citywide. Some departments do a portion of that themselves, but within our area, we also have that. And then that also includes the handling of the mailroom that falls under the central stores. And so all of those services that we provide, those costs then get allocated out to the departments for reimbursement. So, and when the reimbursement is done, it's for the cost of whatever we provided them plus the employee support to go with it.
All right, any other questions about what we've seen so far before Paula moves on to, I believe, some of our questions? Paula, I'm not seeing any hands raised right now, so.
Okay, fantastic. So I had 3 questions that were raised, and they're questions 9, 12, and 26. And they really had to, I'll go ahead and read these really quick. Should the state fail to provide funding for co-response models, could this be a source of funding to provide our own co-response program? In other words, could the remodel be postponed? So this is having to do with the Kent East Hill Operations Center, be postponed until we need money for co-response programming. The next question is actually very similar to that and ultimately asking, what is our plan B? How can we plan to fund these programs? I'm concerned that approving budget that doesn't address the important measures of the community is asking for. And then finally, if the state fails to fund policing data technology, could we use the cars per officer and stagger them differently to fund the Kent PD data collection FTE and or the requisition software to enable full transparency for data reporting? So with these 3 questions, one of the things that I can say about the whole budget process is going into the 21-22 budget process, we had just gone through a grueling exercise to reduce the budget by $15.7 million. So when we start looking at some of these other programs and being able to fund the programs that are there, we have to ask ourselves, where do we get the funding? We had just reduced by $17 million. Do we? So I think in order to address some of these, I think it's going to be incumbent to either find a source of revenue that can be able to cover to pay these, or do we want to go through the idea of reduction again, which at that time, that was one of the areas that I know that the mayor did not want to have to put the city through that kind of a reduction process again through this, which is why during the COVID process, we did try to address that structural imbalance for the 21-22 budget. So with these ones, these are areas that I know are incredibly important, not only to you, but to the community. It's the matter of funding to be able to support these. So I just wanted to at least put that out there, respond to that, and kind of let you know where the thought process was walking into this 21-22 process, and not take away from the value and importance of these other programs.
Paula, just really quickly, because I know we've talked a little bit about the data collection in the past. We do have data being collected by someone. It just might not be as specific as some of us would like to see. Is that correct?
I think that would probably be best for, especially if you're looking for policing data, if that was a question that maybe the police chief could address maybe on Saturday. Because I'd hate to misspeak on that, because I'm not as familiar with what data is being collected and by whom.
Okay. Councilmember Boyce, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I think I recall the police chief saying the data is there, but it's in lots of spots. So we'll need someone to help to kind of pull it all together. But he probably can clarify that on over the weekend. And I think those three questions, they're very important, right? And I think the community is, asking for data and accountability, dashboard type stuff. From what I'm hearing in the legislature, I mean, they are looking, at some of the issues here to try to fund them. This is not just Kent. This is all of the city is looking for something like this here. And my proposal would be, the legislative meet from January through probably April, May, June. We'll have a pretty good idea on probably what's on the table, what's not on the table. And then if we need to make some changes then going in, to the adjustment of the budget, and we probably can look at them. But, I think right now the way things are is pretty accounted for, things pretty tight. I'm leaning heavy on us, to really kind of reach out to our people in Olympia and try to really emphasize and push how important this is to all of the city, including the city of Kent. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. And I have to agree. I think some of the data that we're asking for is really important information, but if we're the only one getting it, we don't have anything to compare that to. If we have our neighboring cities that aren't collecting that same data, then I feel like we all need to be on the same page. And I think that does start with the state providing some sort of resource or some standards for the way that data is gathered and then how it's compared. So I do agree with that. Any other questions or comments about these questions that Paula has here?
Councilmember Troutner, I would raise my hand, but I
Yeah.
can't to raise my hand. Sorry.
Please go ahead, Paula.
Can I add one more thing to this as well? One of the things we want to be mindful of when we're looking at what revenue streams we want to fund, what sort of programs. When we start looking at our capital dollars, capital funding is earmarked for one-time projects. So I know that there was some discussion, one of the questions referenced, hey, if we didn't do the Key Hawk project, could we use the monies for this other program if we delayed it? Unfortunately, those dollars are one-time dollars, and it's really important that we don't use one-time dollars to fund on things that are ongoing expenses. So we want to be thoughtful too about what sort of revenue streams that we're looking at using to ensure that we keep those differentiated.
Very good point. Thank you, Paula. Councilmember Larmer, do you have a question or comment?
Actually, I think Paula just answered it. So I was just going to say this kind of goes back to my question number 11 about where some of the funds were coming from, whether it was general or capital. And it sounds to me like the answer is it is coming, because it is coming from capital, it is a restricted fund source. So it couldn't easily be reallocated. But, you know, I just feel like this, you know, these are programs that we're hearing from community that are important. And, you know, I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing that the state is taking this seriously, but we have to take it seriously too. And we have to honor that this is a need that we're hearing loud and clear from our community. And I want to make sure that we are committed that if the state doesn't act, we will find a way to establish these programs ourselves. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Larmer. Councilmember Fincher, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to add that although it would be good to have the entire state in on collecting all of the data so that we can compare ourselves to other cities, there is value too to knowing how we are doing in Kent, just looking at our own data, especially when it comes to race, when it comes to gender, because there was the question of stops and what's going on in Kent without having to compare to other people. So without that data, we don't know. So just to add that in there too. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Larmer.
Yeah, actually, so just one more question that just came to me. But Paula, wouldn't a software or a technology investment be a capital investment?
On the technology side, yes, that would be. But I thought that it included also an FTE to maintain that. So although the technology would be, the FTE to maintain wouldn't.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions for Paula? And Paula, do you have anything else for us?
I had a few other questions that I'm happy to go through if you guys have time, because the last thing that I have really is what our timeline looks like. I've shared that before. And then, so our next opportunity to get together is going to be on Saturday at 8 o'clock. That'll be an opportunity for departments to do their presentations and also to talk to you about some of their capital requests. And then we will come back to October 20th to another workshop. And again, continuing to answer your guys' questions as they do come up. And then we'll also have our public hearing. And hopefully by October 27th, we can make some final decisions on the budget. And by the 10th of November, take it to the budget for recommendation, and on the 17th for final adoption.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you, Paula, for putting together the budget books that we had asked about the last time we were all together. That's helpful. I know some of you have pictures up, but if you have not, they are here at City Hall. And they will be very helpful, especially as we go through and hear from our directors on Saturday.
And I will have to give
No, go ahead.
Shout out to my team who have been working so hard to put all these materials together for everyone. They've done really a wonderful job, and it's been a very tight turnaround and a very tight timeline. So I'm very grateful for everything that they have done.
Yes, and please pass on many thanks and kudos from all of us. So we appreciate it. And thanks to all of my colleagues for getting your questions in. If you continue to have questions, make sure we get those to Paula so that directors have enough time to gather information and get those questions answered on Saturday. So, perfect. Anything else for Paula? All right. Paula, unless you want to answer any other questions, if you want to save those until Saturday, we've got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes left. So
I am happy to do whatever you guys want. I do have a few questions I could probably get through really quick just to get them off our list.
Sure, let's go for it.
All right. One of the questions, which is question number 18, on page 21, please explain the significant increase in general operations allocation in 2022. And is the general operations the same as the general fund? So I actually want to take time to answer this question and the next question, which is question number 24, which asks, are there legal restrictions on how we allocate the remaining $1.8 million of outdoor square footage tax? I'm sorry, I've been talking an awful lot tonight. So talk just really quick about the B&O tax. So B&O tax, the way that the ordinance is written now, I'll be the first to tell you it's very cumbersome and very difficult to decipher. So let me try to make it fairly simple to give you an understanding. If you're looking at page 21 of the book, which I know many of you don't have it, but on page 21, there is a graphic that says B&O tax allocation. The question that I'm being asked, question number 18, is asking about the general operations portion. What you're going to find that in 2020, this is the first year that you're seeing that general operations portion of that B&O tax. And the reason for that is with the, excuse me, with the square footage increase that went into place January 1 of 2020, the way that the ordinance written is that would go to general operations, AKA the general fund. So this is one tiny piece of the whole puzzle with B&O tax that says it stays in the general fund. In 2022, there are increases that will be happening to the gross receipts portion of the B&O tax. And so what you're seeing is, again, that's staying in the general fund, but in accordance to how the ordinance is written. So the most recent pieces of increase are specifically designated to stay into the general fund. When the budget was put together for the square footage tax, we stuck with the intent of the ordinance and have allocated it primarily for capital, $1.8 million, and then the $300,000 to be able to support that economic development opportunity fund. Ultimately, beyond the new increases that came in prior to that, and still going forward, the B&O tax first pays for administering the program. So that's the tax division. Next, it then provides for money to the streets fund for capital. And then it provides money to the Parks Department for capital. So currently, personally, I would love to see a cleaner ride out of the B&O tax code. So the distribution was a little easier to explain and also to administer. But truly, that's why you're seeing that growth. It was designed that way in ordinance. This was part of that fiscal cliff, solving the problems of the fiscal cliff that were being encountered just a couple of years back. So this was what was looked at through that process. Any questions on that? I know the second part of question 24 asked, could a portion of this allocation bolster the Human Services Fund? And I think that that's going to probably involve a longer discussion than today. And I do know that we are going to have some discussion about our human services on Saturday. So that might be an opportunity to go there, discuss that. Any questions on B&O tax?
I don't see any hands raised.
All right. So question 19, and I'm sorry, on my agenda for you guys, there were two things that I said I was going to have to present for you. And unfortunately, we just literally ran out of time. But I do have some information. It says there's a 10.8% increase in economic and community development expenditures. What are these? Is this related to the COVID loan program? So related to that, the increase that you're seeing, no, it's not related to the COVID loan program. That one's easy enough. But when you look at the overall increase from economic and community development, comparing 2020 to 2021, there are several things that are going into play. So to arrive at that 10.8% increase, 4% of that increase is the $300,000 of the economic development opportunity fund. That's their request that's in there. That's 4%. In addition, there are maintenance and subscription costs for their Amanda system. That's their new permitting system that they are in the midst of working on right now. That cost is $235,000. That equates to 3.2% of their increase. In addition, during the COVID reduction exercise, they did have $60,000 in one-time reductions that were only going to be faced during 2020. So that meant in 2021, those expenses had to come back. So that will be an increase because we did reduce that $60,000 from their budget. That equates to 0.8% of their budget. And then also the GIS allocation that goes to their department, that actually increased by $70,000 based on the use that they're using. So that increase of $70,000 was nearly 1%. That leaves less than 2% of that increase, or about $140,000, are related to things like salaries, benefits, supplies, services that roll into those figures. So I was able to get you the breakdown for them. I know that the other question related to please explain all the increases over 5%. It was actually in a different question, so I didn't get to that one. I thought that I was going to, so I will address that at Saturday's workshop. Do you have any questions about ECD?
Madam President.
Councilmember Boyce. Yep, go ahead.
Just a reminder to my peers that, you know, the B&O is paid by the business community, right? So we made a promise to them on our ordinance that money would be strictly for street and ECDC. So just need to keep that in mind when you talk about the B&O.
Great reminder. Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. Any other questions about that last piece? Councilmember Fincher, you have your mic off, but I don't know if you have a question or comment.
No,
Oh.
no, Councilmember Boyce said everything perfectly about the B&O, so thank you.
Great.
All right, and then I want to apologize. One other thing that I thought that I would have for you, Councilmember Boyce, was some trending related to medical premiums, but I will have that for you on Saturday. I do apologize. 1 week turnaround came really quickly. So that's the last of the questions that I have answers prepared for tonight.
Totally unacceptable. I'm just kidding. That is fine, Paula. I know you've been working your butt off, so I can wait. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.
Well, I appreciate you spending some extra time on those additional questions. Anybody else have something for Paula before we take a little break here? All right, thank you again so much, Paula. You are doing a fabulous job with getting our questions answered and making sure we have all the information we need. So again, thank you to you and your entire team. And with that, that brings us to the end of our workshop. So let's take a quick break and I will see everyone back here at 7. We are adjourned.